Milton Friedman is one of the very influential voice in economic debate and on the CSR debate. So I want to dig a little bit on his argument. He wrote a very, very influential book in 1962 called Capitalism and Freedom. That book would be very influential because Milton Friedman, who 10 years later would get the Nobel Prize in physics, in economics, although it's a kind of an abuse of language because there is no Nobel Prize in economics, so it's the prize of the Bank of Sweden in economics. He is also one of the founders of the Chicago School that was extremely influential in US politics and later on in Western countries and in countries in which the US exported the free market ideology. As you can see from the title, it's all about capitalism and freedom. And in that book, and later in other formats, is going to defend a very very peculiar way what he considers to be the social responsibility of business. He published in 1978, from memory, a column in the New York Times Magazine that was titled "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase its Profits." We've talked about that. I want to come back to his argument because as much as I despise Milton Friedman and what his disciples have done, Milton Friedman is a very rigorous, systematic thinker. And critical thinking is about engaging with smart people who disagree with us for us to get smarter. So I want to look at the detail of his arguments, but because it's actually quite subtle. It's often reduced to the social responsibility of businesses to increase its profits. But that's not actually what he says in the text. So we're going to look in detail in the text. Very quickly in the first page, he said, in fact, they are, or would be, if they or anyone else took them seriously, preaching pure and unadulterated socialism. So already he's equating the idea that there are social responsibilities for corporation and businessmen outside of their corporation as socialism. And as you can tell, he doesn't like socialism. Remember, we are in the Cold War and very much in tension between the capitalist US and the socialist USSR. But he says businessmen who talk this way are unwitting puppets in the intellectual forces that have been undermining the basis of free society these past decades. And he considers social responsibility of business to be analytical looseness and lack of rigor. So he's not a big fan of the idea of CSR that is growing in the 60s and in the 70s, partly following Howard Bowen that we talked about. So he doesn't like it, and you can tell that he thinks that any kind of limitation of someone's freedom would be a drift toward socialist dictature. So aside from his political phobia, I want to go into the detail of why precisely he doesn't like CSR. And he says, and you'll see that what the title is why the title is very reductive, that responsibility of business is to conduct the business in accordance with the desires of the owners of the company, which generally will be to make as much money as possible while conforming to the basic rules of society, both those embodied in law and those embodied in ethical custom. So he's saying that someone who's running a company has a responsibility which is to its employer, to his employer or her employer, the people who own the company, which generally will be to make as much money as possible. But he's not saying that it's always the case. He's not saying that all businesses must always increase their profit. He's saying you must run the company the way that the owners of the company expect you to. So you could think of a company that is not maximizing profits as long as, for Friedman, the owners of the companies are desiring that. But more importantly, he's saying in the last two lines, conforming to the basic rules of the society, both those embodied in law and those embodied in ethical custom. So what Friedman is saying that, yes, you're trying to generally maximize profits, but while doing that, you have a duty to respect the basic rules of society. You have to respect the law, you have to respect the legal rules of the game, and also this kind of vague term that he calls ethical custom. So he is bringing a bit of ethics and morality into the framework. He's saying that you have to respect the rules of the society. If you read Capitalism and Freedom, you will see that it's very minimalist into what should be the legal framework and what should be the ethical constraints. But he's already telling us that it's not all about maximization of profit, it's maximization of profit within a certain framework in which it operates, and that's not nothing. It means that there are rules of the game, and these rules of the game in capitalist democratic society are decided by the constitution, by a legal framework, a parliament, and a judicial system that mostly for Milton Friedman impose taxes and then uses these taxes in accordance with the preference and desires of the public. So what Milton Friedman is saying is that there are systems that will take money from company, take money from the profits, and use it in a way that has been very refinedly organized politically through history. We have constitutions, parliaments, and judicial system that are going to tax companies and then use that money in line with what the public wants. Therefore, if before there's a profit, as a decision maker in a company, you start deciding other things, you might be limiting the power of that process. As he says, if a businessman starts to feel a sense of social responsibility, if he starts to use the profit of the company to do other things than just maximize its economic efficiency, the businessman, self-selected or appointed directly or indirectly by stockholder, is to be simultaneously legislator, executive, and jurist. He is to decide whom to tax, by how much, to what purpose, and how to spend the proceeds. Basically, the point of Friedman is that if we have democratically defined systems that will tax and use the proceeds of the taxes in the way that the public wants, it would be politically problematic for some businessmen to decide what to do with the money instead of just paying taxes on their profits and then letting society decide. And then he refers to Capitalism and Freedom, his book of 1962, but he says again that the responsibility of business is to use its resources to engage in activities designed to increase its profit so long as it stays within the rule of the game. So the argument here that is very powerful of Milton Friedman is to say, if you start to think that you have a corporate social responsibility, and if you start to use money from the profit of your company to serve this corporate social responsibility, it means that you are deriving some of the money that's supposed to go to taxes into a state that is supposed to allocate it in accordance with the desire and the will of the public, and you are deciding by yourself what is important. This is an argument that is difficult to refute, and that would come to question some of this philanthropy capitalism that we are seeing today. There are some weaknesses in the argument of Milton Friedman, And other thinkers of CSR that we'll talk about will help us in showing the weaknesses and the blind spots of this thinking. But the argument of Friedman is much more refined than the social responsibility of business being to increase its profit. And he's actually making a political statement saying that if you start to develop a CSR policy, you are starting to be political in essence, which might be problematic in a democratic society.